Give me a minute. Is this working? Hopefully this time it won't start screaming at me in Seraphim. Ah, yeah, it looks pretty good so far. Audio's working. Testing. Hoinos, tuoh, treyes. Remarkable. Okay, let's get into it. Right, so as I was saying before, the cases aren't nearly as bad as some other languages I've seen. Kitashinga has 23, Jutam has 60, and Wakey has potentially infinite, depending on how you classify them. So yeah, I wouldn't be complaining too much about it. Oh yeah, hang on. I just remembered. I should probably introduce myself. Start from the top. Always forgetting to do that. The name's Aurelio. Ambrose Aurelio. I'm 57 years of age, 6'1", left-handed, O-negative. I'm a private investigator and amateur philologist. This recording's coming from a Q-zone dimension, where I've been receiving transmissions relating to the far-off cosmic city of Carcosa. They have revealed to me, piece by piece, a truly fascinating linguistic system, whose encryption will prove vital to the integrity of my whole dimension. I'm here to impart to you the essentials for acquiring the high tongue of lost Carcosa. Hyadesian Factorlang. Now we can get down to business. Let me take you back to the first transmission I received. I was enjoying a hot cup of espresso in my study, back in the bad old year of 35, about to pore over the latest case, can't remember what it was now, something about a fella named Hildred, when I heard the queerest sound. I wasn't sure what it was at first, but eventually I discovered that my typewriter was typing something out of its own accord. It worked at a feverish speed, as though it would cease to be if it didn't communicate itself with maximal efficiency. When, finally, it finished with a splutter, I saw before me a detailed dissertation explaining the mathematical principles underlying what I would come to know as Jour or Hyadesian Factorlang. Before I'd even come to grips with what I'd witnessed, I found myself deep in the contents of the dissertation, which began in familiar territory, yet whose progression strayed ever further therefrom. First transmission, prime factorisation. Allergen information, this section is going to have a lot of fancy maths notation. If you're allergic to freaky symbols, you might want to not look at your screen for a bit and just, listen to the sound of my voice. Let's say that you're the type of individual that likes numbers and wants to be able to write them down broken up into their prime factors. This is how you'd do it. Every positive integer n can be written uniquely as a sum of prime numbers p raised to an exponent ep. You take a certain number of prime numbers as the base and raise them to a power of an integer greater than or equal to 0, where only a finite number of non-zero, and you multiply them all together. This process can be used to create any positive integer, and no two combinations will produce the same number, meaning this process is unique. This is known as the fundamental theorem of arithmetic, and it's a foundational concept in number theory, as well as being the basis for Hyadesian Factorlang. Let's take the number 60 as an example. 60 can be broken down into 2 times 2 times 3 times 5. Group the 2's together, and you get 2 to the power of 2, or 2 squared, times 3 times 5. There are two small caveats to this. You have to imagine that every prime is raised to the power of 0 unless otherwise specified. And there is always an infinite number of primes extending out to the right past all the numbers that you've specified. If all the primes are raised to 0, every single one, this is called the empty product and is equal to 1. This officially gives us a unique representation for every positive integer. Now, the Hyades, they chose prime bases over standard positional base systems for the following reasons. They are purely multiplicative or exponential rather than additive. They are universal, so there's no bias towards representations in a particular base. And it gives you real information about all the number's factors, which govern a lot of its properties as numbers. Now let's introduce a bit of notation so we don't get cross-eyed looking at primes all day. Since the primes always appear in the same order, 2, 3, 5, 7, etc., then we can do away with writing them entirely and just write the exponents. Let's write them between square brackets and separate them by commas. This is called the prime exponent vector of a number, and it works just as well as the standard exponent notation we were using earlier. For our earlier example, 60, this can be written as 2, 1, 1 in square brackets. This is our exponent vector. Now, what if we tried to factorize a number like 48? You break down its factors and it comes to 2 to the 4 times 3. Look at that 4 hanging out of the exponent, acting all smug and composite. I don't like it one bit. Let's add a new step where we break down the exponents of the primes into their prime factors too. Primeception. This would give us 2 to the 2 to the 2 times 3. Now look at this. We've introduced multiple layers worth of prime exponents. Now the more astute among you may have realized an issue. We can no longer contain all the factorization information we want in a single vector. Let's make a new prime exponent vector for each new factorization layer. We can call this amendment to our system extension 0. We can space out the lower layers so that it's visually clear which of the primes is being raised to the exponent in the higher layer. Now, positive integers are nice and all, but they've been around since prehistory. I want something a little bit spicier. Can we go negative? We can, if we introduce a negative unit at the front of every row of primes. Enter extension 1. Negative 1 can be raised to 0, which turns it into 1 by default, or negative 1 can be raised to 1, turning it into negative 1. The exponents are in modulo 2, so that basically means any larger numbers are equivalent to either 0 or 1. Right, we've got another example. Negative 60 is written as negative 1 to the 1 times 2 to the 2 times 3 to the 1 times 5 to the 1. It is straightforward to amend our exponent vector to incorporate negative 1. We simply start with a negative unit, and then every exponent thereafter is for the primes. Before, our prime 2 was in first position. Now it is in second position. 3 is in the third position, 5 in the fourth, and so on. Negative 60 as a vector is 1, 2, 3, and 1. This is the part where it really starts coming together. We have allowed a negative unit at the front of our array of primes, and we've allowed exponent vectors for each level of factorization. What happens when we combine the two and allow a negative out the front of the higher layer vectors? For extension 2, raising a number to a negative turns that number into the denominator of a fraction. This means we can write out the set of all rational numbers denoted by Q, such as 1/2, 3/4, or 69,421 over 42,021. From here on, we can follow a formulaic pattern. In general, all of the output numbers of extension A are allowed as inputs into the exponents of extension A plus 1, i.e. in extension 1, we produce negative numbers as outputs, and here in extension 2, we plug in those outputs to the exponent vectors, which gives us the rational numbers. Let's keep that pattern going with extension 3. Plug in the rational numbers into the exponent vector. In our layer notation, that means putting the negative unit into the third layer vector. For example, the square root of 6 is 2 to the half times 3 to the half. However, these halves can also be factorized, with a negative 1 sitting on a new layer up. So now we have layers of exponentiation like so. This gives us another new class of numbers, algebraic radical numbers. They are irrational numbers, written using the radical sign, which cannot be expressed as a fraction. They encompass the famous square root of 2, or 2 to the 2 to the negative 1, but also cube roots, fourth roots, and so on. Now, I'm a bit excited, because if we do something crazy and take the negative unit itself to the power of a rational number, we get another class of numbers, the complex numbers. Consider that the negative unit exponents determine the direction of a number in complex space around the unit circle, angle theta, and the infinite primes after it determine the magnitude of that number. Astounding! One caveat for this level is that we cannot actually write the root of all polynomials in this way, and therefore not all algebraic numbers. For example, the famous golden ratio, or phi, is the root of the polynomial x squared minus x minus 1, which gives you 1 plus root 5 over 2. Unfortunately, this involves the addition operation, which our system of multiplication and exponentiation does not allow. Therefore, we say that only non-additive algebraic radicals can be produced using this method. Now all this leads us to another wild set of numbers, our final set for the day. If we allow negative exponents in the fourth layer vector, we get integers raised to the power of a radical. For example, 2 to the power of root 2. These weird numbers are known as Gelfond-Schneider transcendental numbers. They're quite a narrow class within the much darker and more mysterious realm of transcendental numbers, numbers which can't be written as the root of a finite order polynomial. If we put negatives in the fifth layer and higher, such as 2 to the square root of 2, we get numbers that don't yet have a formal name or definition in mathematics. I imagine them as high-dimensional cousins of the Gelfond-Schneiders that live shrouded in darkness, waiting for some crazed mathematician to uncover their secrets. Think how far we've come. We started off being able to represent all positive integers, then all integers, then all the rationals, then a narrow subset of algebraic numbers, the algebraic radicals, and then an even narrower set of the transcendentals, the Gelfond-Schneider crew and all their unnamed higher order cousins. Now, if you're still patiently watching, waiting for this to eventually turn into a presentation about a language, then your time has come. Right after a quick word from this presentation's sponsor, the darkest god of which one must not speak. Thank you very much, Mr. In Yellow. Now back to the presentation. I received the second transmission a few days after the first, and accompanied with the explanations of the language's morphology, I noticed something in the margins that I hadn't before. A blasted inscription that appeared to be an orthographic representation of the language. I cannot show it here, lest your eyes succumb to its intoxicating wonder, but it became clear that decrypting this inscription would prove vital to the survival of my dimension and perhaps many others in the Q zone. Hyadesian Factorlang uses this system of unique factorisation of numbers we described earlier as its fundamental morphological basis. The negative unit, prime bases, and exponents all work together to encode Factorlang's lexicon, morphemes, and derivations. Each number, fully split out into its factorisation, is equivalent to one word. Let's start with the roots. The affix layer 1 encodes one of two things. 1, the base semantic meaning of a word, or 2, a grammatical affix or modifier. Some examples of semantic roots are the prime 19, which corresponds to the root meaning consumption or to consume, the prime 23, which corresponds to destruction or to destroy, and 47, which covers emotions or feeling. Most basic grammatical affixes are in this layer 2, including prime 2, which corresponds to case, and prime 3, which corresponds to number for nouns and tense for verbs. More on this distinction later. The meaning of a semantic root can be further refined using high-layer exponents, which are used as grammatical affixes. For example, the prime 79 by itself means to move, but 79 squared means travel, and 79 to the 3 means transport, etc. While semantic roots communicate meaning on their own, the grammatical roots require affixes to determine their meaning. A 2 on its own refers to case, but without an affix, it just represents the general idea of case, which is quite limited in its utility. However, it is used in the name of the language. It's the second layer exponents above 2 which determine the case, such as 2 to the 2 for nominative, 2 to the 3 for accusative, 2 to the 5 for adjectival, etc. The number of affix layers could be arbitrarily high, depending on the level of specificity required by the root. Now, this is a very important point, and we must not forget it. This language has no verbs. Hang on. Wait, that doesn't sound right. Give me a minute. My apologies. That was a miscommunication from the transmission. I meant to say this language has negative verbs. My goodness, can you imagine? The only languages in all of Arizona observed to have no verbs are the Tamarian-style mytho-historical languages, Darmok and Starmok, which is this definitely not one of those. Oh, that's a good one. No verbs. Anyway, negatives play a very important role in morphology in this language. At the root layer, they determine the part of speech of a word. So, positive numbers are nouns, negative numbers are verbs. Other parts of speech exist, such as movement, sound, and so on and so on. The full breadth of Hyadesian expression is vast and enthralling, but alas, beyond the scope of this presentation. At higher layer affixes, they effectively invert or subvert the meaning of the set of affixes. Precisely how depends entirely on the roots themselves. Now, let's take, for example, the number -3 to the power of 2. We can see just by looking at it that there is a -1 in the root layer, which means the part of speech is verb. For verbs, prime 3 is the root for tense. For tense, a positive exponent refers to non-past tenses. And indeed, if we left the -3 as it were, it would in fact encode a general non-past tense. Prime 2 in the positive exponents for verbs refers to the present tense. Therefore, -3 to the 2 encodes the present tense of a verb. If, however, we change the exponent sign from positive to negative, we would still be encoding a verb's tense, but negatives in this context encode past tenses. And for tense, prime 2 with a negative encodes the immediate past. Thus, I began to see words are made out of a correspondence between the positioning of primes in their factorisation and grammatical and semantic morphemes. But I had no idea how it all fit together. How big do words normally get? What about adjectives and pronouns? What kind of word order is possible? Just as these questions began crystallising in my mind, I was graced with the third transmission. I didn't have to wait long for the third transmission on syntax, nominals, and verbals. Whoever was sending these clearly was eager for me to pick up my pace. Setting aside all other things, I worked night and day to make sense of it all. The main thing I discovered was that these dispatches were coming from some kind of organisation. However, the logo unfortunately did not render particularly faithfully on the typewriter. So it's something like Lagori Portaloos? Please correct me in the comment section. I'm certain that is not their true name. Either way, when it comes down to it, I owe the eventual survival of the Q dimension entirely to Lagori Portaloos. Syntax. Hyadesian Factorlang is a highly synthetic language with a very high morpheme-to-word ratio. Affixes can be analysed as agglutinative rather than fusional, as each number in a layer can be added or omitted, with the semantic and grammatical meanings being transparent and interchangeable. The word order is... we'll get back to that one. For the purposes of standard speech, there are effectively only two parts of speech: verbs, or more accurately verbals, and nouns, or nominals. It will be best if we examine them independently and at length. Nominals. This category groups together a few different parts of speech that would be separate in many other languages, such as nouns, adjectives, and pronouns. Each of the above are inflected with case marking. The language has nominative accusative alignment, and the most common cases include adjectival for adjectives, genitive, dative, instrumental, locative, vocative, purposive, ablative, semblative, illative, partitive, inessive, and benefactive. Which, as I was saying before, sounds like a lot if you're a feeble Indo-European, but many other Arizonan languages have far more cases than this. Quit your complaining. Let's smash out some other common affixes besides case. Grammatical number, size and shape, which are two layers of the same affix. Now for shapes. Now for sign. Those familiar with astrology might think you are familiar with this, but think again. This consists of two parts: element, and then the second part is cardinality. Alright, animacy. Hold tightly to the reins of your steed. Gender. And don't worry, if you're into this sort of thing, there's a whole section on it later with diagrams in the complex plane. Adjectives agree with the nouns they modify in any of the above affixes that are specified on the noun. However, adjectives agree for case in a way that I've never seen before. So, for a slight tangent, the case of the noun that an adjective modifies is specified through additional affixes on the adjective. If there is a sequence of adjectives, then the full chain is marked recursively until the case of the head noun is reached. The same process is used for nouns in the genitive. For example, take the phrase, "My older sister's quick brown fox jumps over the nosy neighbour's lazy dog." And lastly, we've got the pronouns. These can be personal, as in the first person, the speaker, second person, the listener, third person, any reference not present, fourth person, anyone that might be listening that's not part of the conversation. For example, audience members, cheeky eavesdroppers, supervisors, or strangers. Cross-curse linguistically, this is a relatively rare interpretation of the fourth person. I'm going to stick some examples on screen because I'm running out of time. In the non-personal pronouns, we have the demonstrative, relative, interrogative, and concurrent. And before we move on to the verbals, there's one more incredible thing that pronouns can do: polyverbal agreement. When relative pronouns, like that, what, or which, introduce a subordinate clause, they are doubly marked to distinguish the main clause and the subordinate clause. And that's nouns done. On to the verbs. Verbals. This category groups together verbs, participles, and adverbs, and are realised as negatives in the base layer. They are mandatory to inflect for tense. Aspect. Other frequently used optional affixes are as follows. We've got voice, mood, evidentiality, and finally we get to flavour. Why should nouns get all the fun with genders and whatnot? Polypersonal agreement is used on pretty much all verbs, and additionally, any verb can be nominalised using participles, which are affixed one layer above the aspect marker. Right, I've been avoiding this one, but you can't outrun your fears no matter how much endurance training you do. Word order. Perhaps Hyadesian Factorlang falls under a broadly head initial or head final order. Maybe it's one of these classic syntactic alignments of SOV, VSO, or perhaps even OVS, if you're feeling spicy. No, maybe all those minute distinctions in the animacy hierarchy from earlier come into play. Or maybe there's some system of topic marking and obviation. The reality in our case is not so familiar, at least not in the realm of natural languages. Word order in Hyadesian Factorlang is based on the absolute value of the word, and can be either ascending or descending. See, up until this point, all those references to prime numbers in their multiplication and exponentiation have been all but abstracted away by a purely positional notation system. So far, we have not had to contend with their values, but our free ride is over. Now we must crunch the numbers and find what all these primes and their exponents equal to as actual numbers. Then, all words with an utterance are simply arranged in numerical order, either highest to lowest or lowest to highest. This decision of ascending or descending word order holds true at every level of the whole utterance. So, if ascending is chosen, one sentence will be arranged lowest to highest, but then the sentences within the whole utterance are also ordered lowest to highest. Simply take the sum of all the words in a sentence and arrange your sentences themselves in order, just as was done with words within a sentence. This is what provides us with the incentive for such extensive morphological marking. Nouns may be flung to the complete opposite end of the sentence to their verb. And so a mixture of extensive case marking and polypersonal agreement ensure that ambiguity is greatly minimised. Whew, it's good to get that off my chest. You may notice that we haven't heard a single snippet of this language spoken aloud so far. I was wondering the very same thing when, finally, the fourth transmission appeared, courtesy of my possessed typewriter. By this point, it had become clear to me that the very recitation of the language is what would set this dimension free from tyranny. Whose tyranny, though, I had no idea whatsoever. The fourth transmission proved that the Hyadesians were only just getting started. Their phonological inventory was like nothing I'd ever heard, which is precisely because it was like nothing the Hyadesians themselves had ever heard. You see, the phonological inventory of Factorlang was founded on two core principles. 1. The sounds are composed of resonance only and contain no plosives that might block flow of air from the lungs. This allowed the language to be sung fluidly without interruption. 2. The sounds are the complete complement of any sounds present in the native Hyadesian language. This ensures that Factorlang can be immediately distinguished from native Hyadesian from pure phonology alone. The phonological inventory of Hyadesian Factorlang is m, n, sh, 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 th, th, h, h, y, y, ha, la, ha, h, r, ra, hwa, wa, a, pra, bra, pra, bra, pra, ha, la, ha, ra, pra, pra, bra, bra, pra, bra, ra, ra, bra, bra, ra, ra, la, sha, ya, sha, la, ya, ya. La, la. Nothing like a bit of ASMR on a quiet evening. Note the lack of velar consonants. The Hyades simply lack a velum, and thus these sounds are totally unpronounceable to them. However, unlike humans, they possess a secondary subtracheal larynx, which allows them to produce the cross-curse linguistically ultra-rare tracheal consonants. Given my inferior human vocal tract, I'll be approximating them as and throughout this presentation. Phonotactics. Because the phonology consists entirely of resonance, phonemes can act as vowels or consonants as needed, and thus there are no real phonotactic constrictions on the language. 3 registers. As the language was being developed and evolved in Carcosa, 3 main registers started appearing. All are based on the same principle of converting the arrangement of factorized primes into phonemes. A physical journey from left to right through the factorization is represented by horizontal and vertical leaps, each of a particular number of steps. This series of steps is converted to phonemes. However, the way in which they are converted depends on the register. Pure tonal. The ordinal appearance of primes is reduced further and further until they become a mere p, whose complex position alone determines the magnitude of the number. Vowels and tone, combining the musicality of tones with the familiarity of more simple vowel-like resonance. Consonants and vowels. This subset of the inventory prioritizes compression of multiple horizontal and vertical steps. Writing system. The Hyades have crafted a complex and beautiful writing system. However, I'm afraid that the margin of this slide is too small to contain an explanation on it. It is time for the fifth transmission, which concerns culture. Gender. Hyadesians have three groups of roughly categorized biological tests. To understand it, let's apply the logic first to our understanding of human gender. Female and male correspond to -1 and 1 on the real number line. The closer you are to -1, the more female you are. The closer to 1, the more male. However, human gender, as we all know, is a spectrum, with variations in direction, positive or negative, and magnitude, distance from 0, are very much possible. A gender value of 0 would be roughly equivalent to identification as agender. A gender magnitude of greater than 1 would be some sort of hypermasculine or hyperfeminine gender. Hyadesian gender, however, does not limit itself to such quaint locations as the real number line. Hyadesian genders are based on 3 equidistant points around the unit circle in the complex plane, with -1 still corresponding to female, but with the complex genders half plus I root 3 over 2, and its complex conjugate half minus I root 3 over 2, corresponding to 2 new genders, known as third gender and 2/3 gender. These are variations on the third roots of unity. The same variation in direction and magnitude is possible here as in the real gender number line, giving a staggering degree of freedom of gender identity expression. In general, all genders in a closed system must be as far from each other on the unit circle, whilst all being equidistant from 0. Kinship. All 3 parties, male, third, and 2/3, are required in reproduction. This means that all 3 individuals have 3 biological parents. Here are some family trees. Hyadesians have meticulously categorized and lexicalized a staggering degree of kinship terms, putting the most complex systems known in human languages like Latin or Chinese to absolute shame. Class, occupation, and formality. Now, you're going to hate me for this, but I barely got started poring over it when I was startled by Dharma Shuya.
11:59 p.m. Central European Time, Friday, October 10th, 2025, no exceptions.
And as a result, I spilt my espresso all over the transmission, which was totally unsalvageable. One must mourn the metaphorical burning of the Library of Alexandria. And finally, there appear to be queer and contradictory accounts of a certain outer god, who is named only in epithets and in the margins of unrelated texts, yet whose influence on the culture as a whole seems to border on total hegemony. I speak of the darkest god, Hastur, the King in Yellow himself. For there he waits as eons pass, his pallid mask concealing all and yet hiding naught. His tattered mantle bears him forth into our minds, bearing memories forever caught. And now, dear listener, we are ready to tackle the blasted inscription in its entirety. The time has come. It's possible that reciting this accursed tongue shall befoul my mind beyond repair. I may be lost, but there is still hope for you. If I may ask 2 final favours. Firstly, that you watch some other entries in the Cursed Conlang Circus 4. And secondly, that you check out Jinx God's channel. He is responsible for depicting my likeness over here, as lovely as it is, and is a highly skilled artist and entertainer in his own right. But I can delay no longer. Here I go. Goodbye, dear listener. Farewell. Sometime later, a certain hero and heroine arrive at Aurelio's study to find the 5 transmissions from Lahari portals. Will they decipher the messages and continue his legacy, or leave buried what ought not to be uncovered?